Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Emily Kevich. I am the Director of Marketing at NAFA, and I am also the staff liaison for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. Today we've got a great conversation for you planned regarding unconscious bias, and this conversation will be moderated by Angela Lapp-Johnson. And Angela is a talent acquisition executive with Catalyst Recruiting and Consulting. After much experience in a rapid career growth in local and national firms, including Mass Mutual, Northwestern Mutual, Angela strategically opened her firm, Catalyst Recruiting and Consulting, to assist diverse members of the financial services industry in finding the best fit to grow their practices. Angela has served on the board of directors of NAFA Indianapolis, where she chaired Membership and Young Advisors Committee until 2019. Active in diversity and inclusion, she has spoken at NAFA's Diversity and Inclusion Symposium in both 2019 and 2020. Angela, I'll turn it over to you to introduce our panelists. Oh, actually,
thank you so much for that.
Some housekeeping items I wanted to just let everybody know. We will be using the chat feature, so please type any questions that you have for our panelists or discussion, because we do want this to be an open conversation for everybody. So please feel free to use that chat feature. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. So I wanted to thank everybody for joining us today. Just bias. My hope is that you're going to have a couple of takeaways. Two amazing women who have accomplished so many impactful things in their career. And experiences. So I'd love is the first executive vice president for Gateway Insurance and Financial, along with running her own practice based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. April Lynn is an NPRT qualifying member. She has her LACP and serves as a NAFA National Trustee. April Lynn was named NAFA's 2019 Diversity Champion and has been recently recognized as Investment News Top 2020 Women to Watch. That's very, very impressive. Congratulations on those accomplishments, April Lynn. And next we have Wynn. Wynn is the Executive Vice President of Business Development for Educators Insurance Resources Services Incorporated, representing the Horace Mann companies in the Twin Cities area. She began her career in the insurance and financial industry in 1986 and works with educational communities to help them prepare for a successful and rewarding retirement. Wynn's father came to the United States as an immigrant from China after being released from prison war camp. Both Wynn and her father were teachers in the Los Angeles School District prior to her career in financial services. Wynn holds a bachelor and master's degree in Asian studies and was fortunate to spend years studying in the Republic of China. She is a graduate of the LEAP program and a member of the National Asian Upward Advisory Board. Her focus in life is to help others gain access to education and resources that will help close the socioeconomic gaps that divide us as a nation and pay it forward to those who have helped her family to assimilate and acculturate to America. Wynn lives on the northeast side of Minnesota in Stillwater with her husband, Gary. So I wanted to thank you both for being here today. This is a very vulnerable topic that we're going to discuss today, and you're going to share some really impactful stories of things that you've encountered in your personal and professional careers. So it looks like, oops, we advanced a little too quickly there. So what we're going to talk about today is biases, conscious biases and unconscious biases. We're going to walk through some examples of those biases, and then we're going to talk about some action items. What can we do to change some of our thought processes to engage more meaningfully with other folks? So this is a quote that I thought was really great to bring this whole entire group together. diversity, the art of thinking independently together. So when we bring diversity to the table and let everyone have an equitable part of the conversation, that's when change and inclusivity happens. So everybody has bias. Whether you want to believe it or not, everybody has biases hardwired into our brains, preference for people that are similar to us, groups that are similar to us, weariness of people that are different, and tendency to save mental energy by using those shortcuts like stereotypes to fill in those blanks about other people. So everybody has them. It's all about recognizing when we have those biases and changing the behavior around the biases. So here's some examples of some biases, and this is a lot of bias, and there's even more out there. But we're just going to talk about a handful of these biases today. Like everything in life, there are no lines in the biases. So Wynn and April Lynn are going to be sharing stories of bias crossover, essentially, where there's experiences where several different biases have happened in one encounter or one story. So we're going to go through some of those things. So let's get started here. So I'd love to start with name bias. And this is a preference for somebody based off of their name. This can also be preference for somebody that has a name similar to yours, or preference for somebody that has a name that's easy for you to pronounce. And so I would love to get this kicked off. April Lynn, if you'd like to share a little bit about name bias and some of your experiences that you've had around that.
Absolutely. And as you can see, my name is long, as listed here on the thing. And I also have an unusual name. So part of the problem that I've had is all growing up, my first name is very hard to say. And I really appreciate it when people actually take the time to try to say it right, even if they don't say it right. I have lots of ways to help people say it. I always try to wear a name tag, and that way it makes it easier for people. My maiden name, Chavez, is a very common Hispanic name, especially in my area. And so it's like Smith. And so I was used to people knowing that. But now when I am around the country, a lot of people don't know that name and it's not familiar to them. And what I don't love is when people make fun of my name or try to call me something else that I didn't ask them to call me. And I think that happens a lot. And maybe that's a way for people to make it familiar for them, but it doesn't make me happy. So I think that is a prime example of name bias that I've seen. And Wynn, I know you also had some comments about your name and what happened to you in the industry.
Yeah, thank you, April Lynn, for sharing that insight. And thank you, Angela, for helping us get comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? Helping us to understand a little bit more about why we might feel that discomfort. And I want to share a story about when my family came to this country. And it's interesting that you brought that up about your name, because my family chose the name Johnson when they came to America, because, oh, that's a good American name, Johnson, like Smith, right? And when I got into the industry, it was in the 80s when I became part of the insurance and financial services industry. And I was selected to become an agent. And part of the discussion as we were signing contracts and getting ready to launch was, gosh, you use your full name, your full legal name. In fact, you even hyphenate your last name, and we need to shorten that up just a little bit. And I'm like, okay, that's who I am. That's my identity. And they said, well, let's do this. Well, no, that's not a common name. So let's just use your first syllable, because that's a very, very strong name, Wynn. And at the time, my last name was Harding, and they said, oh, we like that, Wynn Harding. And I was taking over for an agent who had very large, very big man, physical in stature. And they said, well, and people won't know if you're a man or a woman, because at the time there were very few women in the agency realm. And that's when I became Wynn Harding and launched my agency career. And the story I have to tell to kind of tie the bow on this is, people used to call up and ask for Mr. Harding because they just assumed that it was a male. And I would just, I would joke along with them and just go, well, he doesn't work here, but I do. I'm the agent and I can help you with that. So yeah, name bias, definitely. Definitely, it's difficult. And I love, Angela, you brought up a statement once about if you're not sure, and April, and you echoed this, ask. If you're not sure how to pronounce it, ask. Because people love, there's a story behind their name.
There is, and our names are so meaningful to who we are. I get it all the time. I have a hyphenated last name, and a lot of people like to shorten it. Being called Ms. Johnson or Mrs. Johnson, just, whew, that's my mother-in-law, and we don't have the greatest relationship, and so it doesn't bring up good memories, and it doesn't make me feel good. And so, when you meet somebody and it's difficult or you don't know how to pronounce their name, ask them. And don't ever shorten their name or give them a nickname to make yourself feel more comfortable. You really have to take the time and the effort to learn their name and have them help you make sure that you understand how to pronounce their name. And people do give a little grace when you're trying to pronounce the name correctly, and just take those corrections and don't be offended by those. So, there's a little bit of an action item there. Don't give people nicknames without their consent. It doesn't feel good. So let's look on to the next slide, age bias, ageism. And I feel like this is very impactful in the financial services industry. We see a lot of folks that are, looking to move towards retirement. We have an influx of young advisors coming in, and NAFA has a really great young advisor team program. So I would love to hear your experiences around kind of those age biases, whether it is somebody that is a little bit on the older side or somebody that's a little bit on the younger side, and what your experiences around that have been.
Yeah, so I have an example of this because I knew I wanted to get into the industry when I was in high school. And so when I was in college, I started as a paraplanner. And I had a lot of people, and that was my fear, that people wouldn't take me seriously. And I was a member of the Young Advisors Task Force here at NAFA, which is those who are under 40 or in their first 5 years of business in this industry. And I really felt that a lot of people in this organization didn't necessarily take us seriously, and they thought that we were here to party and that we weren't learning anything, that we would come to meetings and we were just all about having fun. And that really wasn't true. And I see that now. I'm no longer a YAT or a young advisor, but I do see that being true with young advisors. They are serious about their careers and they're taking the time to do what they need to do. And I think that there is some ageism. The average age of our advisors is 58. And one of the things that I did to kind of learn more and that's really helped me is this book. We had this speaker at NAFA's P+P's Economy has helped to learn a little bit more about how to understand the younger generations and those coming up. But that's definitely an issue, and trying to figure out ways to be validated, I think, is important.
And I'll tag on to that also, April Lynn. One of the things coming into the industry was I had been associated in the insurance financial services industry for a few years before I started, and almost 8-9 years. And so moving into an agent role, now all of a sudden you're new into that position, and people assume if you're young that you don't have any knowledge, any experience. However, that's when I learned very quickly that in order to build those deeper, mutually beneficial relationships with prospects and the existing clients in that particular book of business, that I had to learn to have conversations in which we got to know each other. We discovered commonalities so that even if we're decades apart in physical age, we're still within hours and days of each other as it relates to who we are as people, what we want out of life, our goals, our hopes, our dreams. and then building the confidence in the prospect or client that I can help them achieve everything they want in life. Because I know, and I'm going to quote Zig Ziglar, I always do, I love this quote, if you help enough people get what they want, you'll get everything that you want.
I believe that is so true. You've got that heart where you're really truly wanting to help other people. And I think, age bias can range from, a professional perspective, working with certain demographics, but also, I've got teenagers. They're doing stuff that I didn't do when I was a teenager, and it's a whole new world. And I've learned to ask a lot of questions to understand their perspectives and the things that they're doing. And I think it's about kind of breaking down some of the barriers that we have in place so we can, understand each other a little bit better. So the age bias is there, and I think it's very heavy and very prevalent, especially in the financial services industry. So this is a huge topic, especially in the financial services industry. Again, I know I have experienced my own gender biases, owning my own recruiting firm, being a female in financial services. There's tons of gender bias out there. And I feel like this is something we could have an entire conference about. But I would love to talk about some of the gender biases that are out there. And, gender bias is exactly what it sounds like. It's the tendency to prefer to work with one gender over another. And I know from my perspective, all of my advisors have always been male. None of them have ever their families don't look like my family looks like. And so I do prefer to work with, females, because I feel like they might understand certain pieces. So I have to make sure that I'm incorporating enough males in my life to kind of balance out that preference to work with females. So I would love to dive into your experiences around gender biases. What are some of the things that you've experienced around gender bias, and how did those interactions make you feel?
Yeah, I think for me, I got onto a board, and right now I serve on a board with 6 men, and they're all Caucasian men over the age of 50 who, come from a different perspective than I do. And it was very hard for me to find my place. And especially when I first got onto the NAFA National Board, I thought that I had to look like everybody else. I thought that I had to be like everybody else. There was no association leadership Barbie that I could follow and dress like. And so I thought I had to straighten my hair, and I liked my curly hair. And I thought I had to wear certain outfits, and I dressed not myself. And so that kind of put me off kilter, and I wasn't able to be myself. I wasn't able to express myself. I was not authentically being true to myself. So what I did was I had to own it. And I started coming and dressing the way that I normally would. And I was able to express my ideas and thoughts, and I bring value to the boards that I served on. And that way they could gain a different perspective, and I wasn't synonymous with everybody else. It's our differences that make us better as a team. And being able to authentically bring our different perspective to the table makes the organization better for what it is trying to do. And I appreciate that about being on board, that I can be myself now. Wynn, I know you have some.
Yeah, I was going to say, Lynn, can you talk a little bit more about that? Speak to that, because it's easy. I know, well, it's not easy. It's difficult, but you realized that you were being your best self when you were able to be your authentic self. How did you not just come to that realization, but then how did you ease into your role of being you?
I think that once I started to, I felt like I really wanted to come out of my shell, and there were so many things that I wanted to say, but I didn't think that was the appropriate thing to say. And at one point, I got so tired of not expressing myself, I just came out with it, and it was met with a very a good response, and they wanted to hear more about my perspective. So I think that if you can bite the bullet and just take that step and start to express yourself and start to be who you are just a little bit, then you will be validated, and then you can feel more comfortable to start to express more and more of who you are. And I think, of course, you have to follow the parameters of the, of the organization that you're serving for, but you still can do that in your own way. It's kind of like I did it my way, but I made the group better for who I was. It didn't come automatically because I didn't have very much self-confidence when I first started in this industry, and I was able to be validated. I had male mentors who really embraced who I was and where I was coming from and helped me to express myself in an authentic way. And I thank them very much for that. And I think that we all can gain some help or some validation from our mentors.
And I have to thank you, because shortly after, in fact, I believe it was the day of that I actually became a trustee, you came up to me and you said, always find your voice at the board meetings. Don't be afraid to express your opinion, because what you have to say is valuable to the association. So I thank you for that, April Lynn.
You're very welcome. I'm so glad you found yourself on the board.
I want to tag on to what you were saying too about how they only want the best for us, right? Our mentors want what's best for us in the environment, the culture that we've landed, because there's a reason and a purpose that we're there. And I know that my mentors really meant well and my best interest when they suggested I change my name, when they suggested that, well, perhaps you need to cut your hair a little shorter. Might be good to just get a little bob going there. And then, and you might want to wear pants a little more often than dresses and skirts. And again, I don't believe that they felt that there was that unconscious bias piece, Angela, I believe. They didn't even realize it, right? That there was a preference for a female in financial services that looked and acted more like a male. So I'll turn it back to you, Angela.
Yeah, I think gender bias, especially in financial services, is very prevalent. And I know that I see a shift going on right now where a lot of organizations are being more intentional about hiring diversity. And I'm hopeful that they also have programs in place to help retain that diversity, because I know my experience being on the agency side, I would recruit females in, and I would watch them fail out so quickly, and it was very frustrating. I saw a lot of diversity walk in the door, LGBTQ candidates, females, people of color, and I saw them walk right back out. So I think the key is you definitely want to attract the talent, but you also want to have the systems in place internally to help support your candidates so they can be successful on your platform. And you know that when you bring diversity to the table, that increases your profits. It has been proven time and time and time again. So I'm hopeful that some of those changes are going to be industry-wide, and it's just going to be part of their normal recruiting practices. I'm very hopeful for that. So the next one I want to talk about is conformity bias. This is when you kind of assimilate and behave similar to a group of people. And I think I've seen this happen more recently, just with some of the things that are going on politically. I'm seeing people that tend to following more and behaving more like certain groups of people. So I would love to hear, and again, this is very prevalent in financial services, feeling like you need to fit into a group of people. And, following certain group norms that are in place. I know that I saw that in a couple agencies that I was in. There were certain things that were done, and I felt like I had to do the same thing to fit in. For me to be successful, I had to do what all the guys were doing, and I had to do what everybody else was doing. And so I think conformity bias in financial services is, another really important topic to talk about. So Wynn, I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience around conformity bias, and then we'll go to April Lynn, since April Lynn has been kicking off all the questions.
Thanks, Angela. You stated at the beginning of this discussion around conformity bias, it is so difficult for us to recruit diversity. People, diversity of practice, diversity of thought, diversity of background, and then we have to work so hard to retain them, because the goal here, and that's what we're talking about today, is inclusion. How do we create a culture that's equitable to all and that everyone feels included? Because we know that that increases engagement. And it's interesting that you asked me to speak on that. And I have a story about being Asian in financial services. A lot of people assumed that because I'm Asian, I'm good at math, right? I must be good at math. Well, but she's female. I don't know. Well, and they looked at those that had come before me who were perhaps male Asians, and we all laughed because there was a gentleman who actually who was Asian, had a PhD in actuarial science. Well, where do you think they put him? That's right, home office and underwriting, right? In actuary as an underwriter. And it turned out that he ended up being one of our most successful agents because he said, not only am I good at math, I'm great with people and building relationships. And I really want to try my hand at the sales side of the business. Well, what was happening was that conformity bias, there was an unconscious bias, or maybe it was conscious, that Asians are, we call fondly M&Ms. And the M&M stands for we're model minorities, we're meek and mild, and we're very quiet. And we do exactly what we're told. And well, I don't know about someone outgoing, gregarious in a sales role. And so we have to overcome that bias and see people, like April Lynn was saying, for their authentic selves and look at the valuable resources and attributes that they bring to an organization, which because they are different, they think differently, they act differently, it actually lifts all of us up and makes us all better in the end.
I think for me, my natural style is to be a driver and to push and be aggressive and assertive, and I had to sort of tone that down. And one of the things, having come from the Hispanic culture and being a native New Mexican, my family acts may be very different than I thought that was going to be okay when I came into this industry. And when I came onto the national stage, I thought that I had to act like, look like, be like all the other people around me, and I didn't bring out my Hispanic side, and I didn't talk like I do at home. And there was an opportunity that I had. I was at a NAFA national conference and went to dinner with the Modises, and they are from Southern California. And we had a wonderful dinner. It was half in Spanish and half in English, and their comments were very familiar to me and their stories, and I was just like loving the dinner, and it spoke to my heart. And I had forgotten how familiarity feels like home. And I felt like I was home when I had dinner with them, and I loved spending time with them. And so that just made me realize that in NAFA and in organizations that we work in, we want to be around those that have similar circumstances. It doesn't necessarily mean nationality, but if you can speak your language that you've grown up with, or say some of the things that you are happy that you've heard from back home, then that will make you more engaged in an organization. And so if we, as an organization or on boards or whatever that we serve on, that we can be with people that honor us and our heritage and where we come from, then I think that we will be more passionate about serving and continuing to be a part of that organization. So when I realized that, it's okay for me to have la raza and to speak like I normally do, then I was much more comfortable to be myself and to do what I do best.
Yes, and I love that story. It always feels good when you feel like, okay, I don't have to jump off the bridge if all of my friends are jumping off of the bridge. I think that's the most common story of the conformity bias. So I would love to talk about, you shared some of your stories today. And I know that everybody has stories about their experiences with conscious and unconscious biases, and lead towards different microaggressions, which I think is going to be a topic for a little further down the road. But I'd love to talk through some of the action items. What can we do every day to learn from the biases that we have, to build more meaningful relationships with those around us? So I think number one is listening. When somebody tells you something, listen to what they have to say. Do not dismiss what their thoughts and feelings are. Educate yourself and others. This really great presentation that NAFA has put together for us is one of those times, those education pieces. And this is a long-term initiative for NAFA. And so continue to educate yourself, continue to talk to other people about it when stuff comes up, and advocate for other people. If you hear somebody giving somebody a nickname because they're not comfortable pronouncing their name or learning how to pronounce their name, advocate for that person. Stand up for others. That's so important because there's so many people out there that don't have the confidence to stand up for themselves in these types of situations. And create and support an inclusive culture that holds everybody accountable. We can implement changes in our own individual behavior, but if our corporations, our companies are not creating a supportive and inclusive environment, the talent is not going to stay. And we really, really need to have that talent in the industry. There's so many underserved markets right now that folks are trying to break into. But it's extremely hard to do that if your company is not standing behind you. So make sure that if your company doesn't have a supportive, inclusive culture, start that conversation of what that would look like. How can we retain really good people? It just makes the organization as a whole grow so much better. So we do have different ways that you can join this conversation, and we're going to take some questions here at the end. Emily is going to be able to moderate those questions for us. But if you're interested in learning more about anything that we're doing here at NAFA, so there are tons of resources on NAFA's website. So direct links are right in here, so you can watch webinars on demand. That's part of your NAFA membership. If you don't have a NAFA membership, we can get you set up with one of those. You can learn about a little bit more about the DEI task force, what we're doing, what our mission is, and how we are impacting the financial services industry. Consider joining us in 2021 as we become the DEI committee, which is really new and exciting. We're all thrilled for these changes coming about for NAFA. So we're going to be taking applications for those here in the next couple of weeks. So if you're interested, there's some contact information down here. Get in touch with Delvin, get in touch with Emily. They're both really great humans. And they'll be able to get you pointed in the right direction. If you want to get active involved, use your voice, share your experiences, so we can make this all a better industry. So I'm going to turn it over to Emily. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and the slides will be available, I think, on the Talent Development Center site. So you'll be able to check out all the things that we talked about today, but I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Emily. Thank you, April Lynn and Wynn, for sharing your experiences. Sometimes those are really hard conversations and raw conversations to have, reliving and sharing those experiences. So thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
Yeah, and I wanted to just add one more item on that tags along perfectly with what you were saying about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, because it's the most wonderful time of the year. However, if you're an immigrant coming to this country whose background and cultural preferences, you're Buddhist, you don't understand this whole Christian thing. And so it's interesting. Don't be uncomfortable with it if you say Merry Christmas to someone, because I'm going to be polite to you and say Merry Christmas back, even though I know at the beginning my mother was like, not really sure what they're saying to me, but I think I'm supposed to just say it back. So, we just can't assume that everyone has the same experiences as we do, the same background. And so, you know what? It's all how it lands on you and how you react to it. And so thank you, Angela, for saying we need to be vulnerable. We need to be open and we need to be honest. And one of the biggest compliments that I know I've been given has been the opportunity to share these stories with you, because it helps all of us and all of us grow and are better for it. And we talk about right now in a world that's so divided, we need to come together. And anything that we can do that lifts all of us up and moves us forward is why we're all here. So thank you for the opportunity.
Well, and thank all of you ladies for sharing your stories and, kind of giving us some perspective. I know for me personally, I went to a conference pre-COVID of 2020, and somebody was talking about this topic of unconscious bias, and it really kind of struck home to me as far as the things that I've experienced even in my lifetime, where you don't even realize that what people are saying to you is kind of a bias. One, I shared this with our group here a while ago, but one that I get sometimes because I live in Iowa and it's not a very diverse population, because I have an olive complexion and you can't really pinpoint exactly, what nationality, what heritage I have. I get the question of, what are you? Not, or as Wynn says, where are you from? Like, not where are you from, where are you from? And things like that just happen in everyday conversation. And so for the attendees that are on, I encourage you to maybe share some stories in the chat about things that you've witnessed, or what have you learned from this conversation that you can now kind of take and apply to your business or your interactions with people in your community and things like that. So just would really like to hear from you guys as far as what type of experiences you've had. Like I said, I never really thought much about getting that question almost my whole entire life, but it's like, oh, well, yeah, and so you don't look like the rest of us. And just kind of the subtle impacts that has on your daily life. So anybody in out there want to share some stories?
While we're waiting, I was just going to say, I always say that diversity is not affirmative action, that it's not about putting people in positions just to put people in positions that have certain characteristics. I think that we all have to work to improve ourselves and each other so that we are qualified to be in positions and to serve in organizations and to be able to share our stories. And I went to Minnesota, and I was at one of their NAFA state conferences, and there was a speaker, and she talked about that when you were in this business, when you first started in this business, somebody reached down and they gave you their hand and they pulled you up. Well, now it's time for you to in turn reach down and pull the next person up, because the sign of a good leader is somebody who has a plan, a succession plan, or somebody that they're pulling up. So you are only as good as the people that you pull up to be with you. So if we think about it like that, if we're in a cooperative, inclusive environment where we're not, we're taking the hand from those that are teaching us and pulling us up, but we're also reaching down and pulling others up along with us. Sharing our stories is a good way to do that.
Yeah. And Andrea just made a comment. She said, my company trained me to say, where are you from originally? It's somewhat open-ended, and it also invites people to talk about themselves. And I think that's great, because it opens up that dialogue. It gives people permission to talk about their heritage and where they from originally.
And I would say that when you ask somebody that question, they're going to answer how they feel comfortable answering it. So you may not get an answer as to what their ethnic background is. You may not know that until you get to know that person a little bit more and they're comfortable sharing those things with you. So yeah, just be aware that people share as much as they want to.
I love that.
I would love to.
Open question too. Open-ended question, right? Ask the open-ended question and invite them to have a conversation and participate. Because again, I started talking about how April Lynn told me, don't be shy, don't be afraid. You know what? Everybody's going to welcome you with open arms, but you've got to find your own voice. And it's tough. It's tough. Sometimes it's hard because, you know, there's some people with voices much louder than mine in the room. But if I've got something to say, I've learned, I've got to say it. It's got to be said. And something, Angela, you taught me was sometimes you might want to just think about that. See how it lands on yourself first in your head. And I love the phrase that you used, say nothing, right? Say nothing. You want to talk a little bit more about that? Thought?
Yeah, sure. So one of the biases that we didn't cover today centers around, the age. So I did want to talk about the age bias real quick. So my oldest is 21. And everybody that I tell that I have a 21-year-old, they're like, oh my gosh, were you 12 when you had him? And I'm like, yeah, I was. It makes me feel uncomfortable, and then I'm going to transfer that uncomfortableness to you. Can you imagine if I said, yeah, I did, and I was raped? That was not my case, but statements like those make people very uncomfortable. I was a young mom. I learned a lot of really hard lessons. And that's, my experience with my 21-year-old. He's a very amazing human being. But I get that a lot as far as the age bias. Well, you're too young to have a 21-year-old. So sometimes when you think that you need to say something or add commentary about, in situations like that, just don't say anything. If you're unsure, don't say anything. Because it makes that person uncomfortable, which will in turn make you uncomfortable. And then you're not building that deep, meaningful relationship with that person. So.
I like the comment that we got in the chat. How about saying, wow, your name is interesting. Tell me about your name. And again, it's that open-ended that allows them to share as much as they're comfortable sharing.
Yeah, it allows for the person to share as much as they want to share, and not feeling obligated to share the full entire life story, because nobody wants to hear that when you're getting to know somebody. Yeah. Do we have any other questions coming in?
Not at this point.
Angela, I know you talked about some stories and some things that have happened. And I know Chris Gandy, when he spoke, he talked about some stories. And I think that the audience was just appalled to hear these things that happen day in, day out. And how would you recommend that somebody who's maybe not involved in the situation but is a bystander, how would you say that they should react or interact or not in that situation?
I think it's going to be whatever their level of comfort is. I did share with these ladies earlier this week that I had an encounter last week at a guitar place where you buy guitars. I was looking for something for my daughter for their Christmas present, and somebody came up behind my wife and I and used extremely derogatory homophobic language. And my fight or flight kicked in, and I just wanted to turn around and be like, I'm sorry, what did you say? I was very angry. I was very offended. It was very, very hurtful. And we turned around and walked out of the store. And I can say that in every situation where somebody has used a homophobic slur towards me, nobody has ever stood up to that person to say that's not okay. And my safety is the number one issue. Otherwise, I would probably fight. which wouldn't be good. So I think, talking about how are you comfortable standing up in that situation? Realizing that you do have a voice and you have influence, and it is okay to disagree with somebody. It is okay to say, hey, what you just said was not okay. And maybe given opportunity or an option for them to rephrase a question or, interact differently. If you're like, hey, whoa, that's just not okay. You can't do that. Like, that is completely rude or disrespectful or whatever. Like, you can't treat people that way. And so speak up where you're comfortable. And sometimes we have to get outside of our comfort zones to stand up for other people.
Right, that just leads right into that accountability piece that you brought up in the PowerPoint, is be accountable to creating that culture, to being the pioneer, the first one, if that's what it takes in that environment. And it's tough. No one's saying it's easy. It's tough. It's very difficult. I know I had situations too growing up, and it was during a time, and well, I shouldn't say during a time, because right now we have a lot of tension going on, right, in our communities with people that don't look like us. And again, I brought that up. The divide that we're having is we're all the same. We're all the same. And then let's look for the commonalities versus accentuating those differences that divide. What unifies us as a people?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wendy, I like what you said about, I want to honor you by pronouncing your name correctly. Could you help me with that? Help me do that. And I appreciate when people say that to me, because I feel like they're taking the time to learn about my name so they can say it better. And I think that's a really good way to pose it to where people feel engaged.
I love that. I love to honor you. That's giving somebody that respect right before you ask them a question, to know that you're coming from a place of respect. I really like that a lot, Wendy.
Yeah, you're coming from your heart, and you mean well. And if we all do well, we all get better, right? We all get better, and it's less uncomfortable the next time. And I want to talk about that moment that you had. That was definitely a teaching moment. So perhaps if you haven't found your voice yet, you're not brave enough to maybe speak up in a situation like you were describing, Angela, and perhaps you had a family member or a friend there, use it to open the discussion, to talk about it, right?
Yeah, so it was, I'm more worried about personal safety speaking up, because I am somebody, I am very active and involved in the diversity task force because it's something that's very important to me. LGBTQ people, a lot of them don't feel like they can be open with who they are. So if you Google gay financial advisors, you come up with a handful of people, and there's a ton of folks out there. So it is more of a safety issue. I was more worried about being shot than standing up for myself, because my instinct was to turn around and say, I'm sorry, what did you just say to me? And my wife was with me. And so I do feel like I can use my voice, but I also feel like right now there's especially a very thin line of speaking up in those situations and having somebody harm you. So, I mean, obviously you need to use some really good judgment in those situations for sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you're so right about personal safety, because I remember being told, our neighbor came over, we had moved, my father was on a special project with the Department of Education. So we moved from California to Washington, D.C. And so we moved out to a suburb of Washington, D.C. and we didn't look like everybody else in the community. And I remember the next door neighbor came over and told my mother that her daughter could not play with me, even though we went to school together, we were in Girl Scouts together, because we were people of color. And then she just flat out said it. And it's like, oh, okay. So it was very difficult for my mother, coming from a place that had very diverse peoples, to a place where like you said, Angela, you feel your physical safety being threatened.
So that kind
Yeah,
of
we
ties
did.
into the, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, so we actually just moved from a place about 45 minutes from where we are right now in Indianapolis. We're downtown Indianapolis, but we moved because the area that we had been living in has become progressively unsafe for LGBTQ people. And our interactions with the community that we had been in for 5+ years, my kids go to school there, had gotten to the point where I was worried about our personal safety, both my wife and I and my kids. So it's a very real thing right now. It very much so is. So I'm sorry, Emily, go ahead.
Yeah, so kind of what we're talking about leads into a question that we just got from the chat. And it says, when you're meeting with a customer and the customer is using derogatory phrases about other people or groups, organizations, how do you handle those situations in a way that the customer knows that you don't agree with them, but you're also not offending the person who's speaking either?
I think you have a tough decision to make. Do you want to work with somebody that has these thoughts and these feelings and is willing to express those to you in an initial meeting? And I know sometimes you don't have a choice about the clients that you're working with. So you can choose to speak up and say, I'm not comfortable with you speaking about people that way. And change the conversation and let them know, set that boundary right away that the way that you are speaking is offensive and I will not tolerate it. And if you have the ability to not work with somebody if they're not willing to change that behavior or change that language, then I wouldn't work with them. But I will let April Lynn and Wynn answer those questions because you guys are more in the day-to-day practice piece of that.
When I've been in those situations, I typically will acknowledge that they've said that, and I will say something to the effect of, in this office, we don't condone, negativity about such and such or whatever it is. In my culture, a lot of times they don't realize somehow that I'm Hispanic or that I have ethnicity, and they will say something, and I just, say, I don't agree with that. However, let's get back to discussing the matter at hand, which is XYZ. And so I let them know that this is not appropriate to say that or do that. And sometimes they'll come back and they'll apologize. Oh, well, I didn't really mean it like that, or they'll back up. But I think that if you acknowledge it, but don't make it like a big deal, don't like stop the conversation and say, okay, I'm not going to talk to you. You come to an understanding and you've heard what they've said, so they're expressing and they feel comfortable to express, which is good. But you also let them know that that's not appropriate in that situation.
Yeah, thank you, April, and for that statement, because it's very true that we have a responsibility, a personal responsibility to create that culture, that environment, that space that is free from worry, free from threats, free from harassment. And if this person that makes comments, because sometimes we have vendors that come in and they'll say some things to some of the team members that are completely inappropriate, right? And they don't work for you, but and they're not a client of yours. You don't want to throw them out on their ear, but on the other hand, you're right. You have to let them know that that's very uncomfortable. Or somebody said in the chat, a little open-ended question there. Oh, tell me a little bit more about why you feel that way or why you think that, because there might be something more going on. Is it the story behind the story? All right. That's just like you saw so many different aggressions. And I know that I keep going back to the Asian community because that's what I'm very familiar with. However, I'm just going to bring it around full circle to what we've been experiencing the last, 8, 9 months, 10 months now, with respect to the coronavirus. And the violence and the threats against the Chinese community became so severe here in the state of Minnesota that the governor actually had to get a hotline going to report these things for people who, and you're right, Angela, it's not safe sometimes to turn around and go, hey, you can't do that. But to have a place that we could report it so that we could look for help in getting us that safety and security that we all deserve and need and want.
And I think if you're expressing yourself in a positive way and you're above the line, as we say, then they will do that also. In addition, I think the people that you work with, so your staff, your colleagues, if you continue to have a positive attitude and demonstrate that you are inclusive, then they will pick that up and they will be that way, not only around you, but in general.
Definitely
Angela,
leading by example is so important.
Well, and Angela, you hit it too. You said, if you can't change people, right?
Yes. Sometimes you have to know when to let go of folks that no longer, deserve to be part of your practice. That's okay to let those clients go especially if it becomes a long-term problem. It's okay to do that. And sometimes people need to hear that I don't have to work with somebody that is going to speak this way or treat me this way because I'm a female or because of my, my heritage, whatever the case may be. You don't have to work with them. You can choose to work with other folks.
This has been a great conversation. Are there any other, got another one. I was just, how do you get them to leave in a compliant way if you're not an independent agent?
There's phraseology that we've used and it's true. It's speaking the truth in that, Mr. or Mrs. Client or clients, I'm not sure that my agency can provide you the level and kind of service that you want and deserve. So, you just invite, because it's about, remember when you're doing that fact finding, you're trying to make sure they're a good fit. And every time you do a household review or asset protection review or fact finder, you're determining if they've gone a different direction in life than you're taking your business community. And, you just have to let it go, as Idina Menzel would say.
And I always say something to the effect of, I need to honor you and the direction that you want to go. And I don't think that I or we, this organization, are the best fit for you. So I need to give you the freedom to move on to someplace else where you are better suited.
Well, we are coming up to the top of our hour here, and I just want to thank everyone to our panel for your insights, contributions, to our attendees for your questions and following along with our discussion. Really hope that we kind of gave you some information to think about, to ponder as you start to deal with others in your community and better ways to have those conversations, and just working towards that whole equity vision that we all have for the future. So this will be available on demand as well as the slides. So look for an email coming soon. And we thank you for your time today.
Yes, thank you, everyone.